In the dim, rain-slicked shadows of a forgotten alleyway in the heart of a bustling city that never truly slept, a homeless man named Elias hunched against the biting wind, his tattered coat barely shielding him from the relentless downpour that turned the streets into rivers of despair. His eyes, weary from years of unspoken hardships, caught a flicker of movement across the road, a female police officer, Officer Lena Ramirez, stepping out of her patrol car with the confidence of someone who believed she could tame the chaos of the night. But Elias saw it before she did, a shadowy figure lurking in the doorway of an abandoned building, his hand gripping something metallic that glinted ominously under the streetlight, a weapon poised to strike in a moment of calculated ambush. Time seemed to freeze as Elias's instincts, honed by a lifetime on the fringes of society, screamed at him to act, even as the world had long ago written him off as invisible and irrelevant. If you believe in the power of kindness and the beauty of second chances, hit that like button, drop a comment below sharing your thoughts, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of humanity's goodness, and don't forget to subscribe to Moments of Love for more stories that touch the soul and inspire the heart. Elias had not always been this ghost of a man wandering the concrete jungle, scavenging for scraps and warmth in the unforgiving urban wilderness. Once, he was a devoted father and a skilled mechanic, living in a modest home on the outskirts of the city with his wife Maria and their young daughter Sophie, whose laughter filled their days like sunlight piercing through storm clouds. Life had been simple yet fulfilling, until the accident, a fiery car crash caused by a drunk driver that claimed Maria's life and left Sophie in a coma, her fragile body hooked to machines in a hospital room that drained Elias's savings faster than he could comprehend. The medical bills piled up like insurmountable mountains, forcing him to sell their home, quit his job to stay by her bedside, and eventually watch as the system he once trusted turned its back on him. Evicted and broken, Elias found himself on the streets, his days blurring into a haze of survival, begging for change not out of laziness but out of a desperate need to afford the occasional visit to Sophie's ward, where he whispered promises of recovery into her unresponsive ear. The city moved around him like an indifferent tide, people averting their eyes from his unkempt beard and ragged clothes, assuming he was just another lost soul succumbing to addiction or misfortune, never pausing to see the man who still clung to fragments of hope amid the ruins of his life. The nights were the hardest for Elias, when the cold seeped into his bones and memories haunted him like relentless specters, replaying the screech of tires and the shattering glass that had shattered his world. He had learned to navigate the dangers of street life, the territorial gangs, the opportunistic thieves, the unpredictable weather that could turn a cardboard shelter into a soggy grave. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. He kept to himself, observing the world from the peripheries, his sharp eyes catching details others missed in their hurried lives. It was this vigilance that had kept him alive, dodging assaults and finding hidden spots for rest, but it also deepened his isolation, turning him into a silent watcher who spoke only when necessary, his voice roughened by disuse and grief. Yet beneath the layers of dirt and despair, a flicker of humanity remained, a stubborn ember that refused to be extinguished, reminding him of the man he used to be, the one who fixed broken engines and mended his daughter's scraped knees with gentle hands. On that fateful night, as the rain hammered down like judgment from the heavens, Elias's routine of scavenging through dumpsters for edible discards was interrupted by the patrol car's arrival. Officer Lena Ramirez was no stranger to the perils of her job. A dedicated cop in her mid-30s, she had joined the force driven by a personal vow to protect the vulnerable after losing her own brother to street violence years ago. Her shifts were grueling, filled with domestic disputes, drug busts, and the endless paperwork that chipped away at her spirit, but she pressed on, her uniform a symbol of resilience in a world that often tested her limits. That evening, she had responded to a tip about suspicious activity in the alley, her radio crackling with static as she stepped out, flashlight in hand, unaware that the tip was a lure set by a vengeful criminal she had arrested months prior, now seeking retribution in the dead of night. The ambusher, a man named Victor with a grudge as deep as his criminal record, waited patiently, his pistol loaded and his intentions lethal, the perfect setup for an execution disguised as a random act of violence. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as he pieced together the scene unfolding before him, the officer's oblivious approach, the hidden figure's tense posture, the subtle shift that signaled impending doom. Something shocking stirred within him, a realization that this was no ordinary mugging but a targeted hit, the kind that left no witnesses and shattered families in its wake. He had seen enough on the streets to recognize the signs, the calculated positioning, the absence of escape routes, the cold determination in the assailant's stance. In that split second, Elias faced his own internal storm, should he intervene and risk everything, or remain in the shadows, preserving his fragile existence? The struggles of his past surged forward, the helplessness he felt watching Sophie's life hang by a thread, the betrayal of a society that discarded him like trash, the fear that any action could lead to his arrest or worse, given his homeless status and the prejudices that came with it. Yet, a deeper instinct prevailed, one born from the love he still harbored for his daughter and the memory of his wife's compassionate heart, urging him to act where others might falter. With a surge of adrenaline that masked his exhaustion, Elias moved silently across the street, his footsteps muffled by the pouring rain, closing the distance just as Victor emerged from the darkness, raising his weapon toward Lena's back. Elias lunged forward, his body colliding with Victor's in a desperate tackle that sent them both sprawling onto the wet pavement, the gun skidding away into a puddle. The struggle was fierce and primal, Elias's wiry frame fueled by sheer willpower against Victor's bulk and rage, fists flying and grunts echoing in the alley as Lena whirled around, stunned by the sudden chaos. She drew her own weapon, her training kicking in, but in the melee, a stray elbow caught her temple, dazing her and sending her stumbling toward the edge of the curb where traffic roared by unchecked. Elias, pinned under Victor's weight, saw her teetering perilously close to the oncoming headlights, her balance lost in the confusion, and with a Herculean effort, he shoved Victor aside long enough to scramble toward her, grabbing her arm and yanking her back from the brink just as a truck barreled past, its horn blaring in protest. The aftermath unfolded in a blur of sirens and flashing lights, as Lena's backup arrived, subduing Victor and hauling him away in cuffs, his plot foiled by the unlikeliest of heroes. Elias, battered and bleeding from a gash on his forehead, sat against the wall, his breaths coming in ragged gasps, as paramedics tended to him reluctantly, their eyes filled with suspicion toward the homeless man who had inexplicably inserted himself into the fray. Lena, recovering from her daze, approached him with a mix of gratitude and wariness, her mind racing to process how this stranger had saved her life not once, but twice, first by disrupting the attack, then by preventing her fall into traffic. But Elias, his voice a hoarse whisper amid the commotion, looked up at her with eyes that held oceans of unspoken pain and simply said two words that would echo in her mind: "Don't talk." It was not a command born of rudeness, but a plea from a man who had learned that words often led to complications, to judgments, to entanglements he could ill afford in his precarious world. As the days turned into weeks, Lena couldn't shake the encounter, her thoughts haunted by the enigmatic savior who had vanished into the night before she could properly thank him or learn his story. Her own struggles intensified in the wake of the incident, nightmares of the ambush, the bureaucratic scrutiny from her department questioning her judgment in responding alone, the emotional toll of nearly losing her life and the guilt of relying on a stranger's intervention. She patrolled the streets with renewed vigilance, but now with a softened gaze toward the homeless population she had previously viewed through a lens of protocol and detachment. Driven by an unyielding sense of debt, Lena began searching for Elias, combing shelters and alleys, piecing together fragments from witnesses who described a quiet man with a limp from an old injury, always carrying a faded photo in his pocket. Her quest revealed the harsh realities of homelessness, the systemic failures, the mental health crises ignored, the veterans and families like Elias who slipped through the cracks, their stories buried under layers of societal indifference. Things began to change when Lena finally tracked Elias to a makeshift camp under a bridge, where he sat staring at the river's murky flow, lost in thoughts of Sophie, whose condition had worsened without the treatments he couldn't fund. Approaching cautiously, Lena offered not charity, but conversation, respecting his silence at first by simply sitting nearby, sharing a thermos of hot coffee that warmed more than just his hands. Over time, as trust bloomed like a fragile flower in barren soil, Elias opened up in halting fragments, recounting the accident, the loss of Maria, the endless vigil by Sophie's bedside, the descent into homelessness that stripped him of dignity but not of his resolve. Lena, moved by his tale, saw parallels in her own grief for her brother, and a bond formed, one forged in shared vulnerability and the recognition that heroes didn't always wear badges or capes, sometimes, they wore rags and carried invisible burdens. The turning point came when Lena, leveraging her connections, advocated for Elias within the system, arranging for Sophie's medical bills to be covered through a charitable fund for office's allies, securing temporary housing for him, and even helping him find work as a mechanic in a community garage that valued skills over appearances. Elias resisted at first, his pride a battered shield, but the sight of Sophie's eyes fluttering open after a successful surgery, her small hand squeezing his in recognition, melted the walls he had built around his heart. The city that had once ignored him now whispered his story in hushed tones, a tale of redemption that rippled outward, inspiring acts of kindness from strangers who left food at shelters or volunteered time to help the unhoused. Lena, too, found healing in the friendship, her patrols now infused with empathy, turning routine stops into opportunities for connection rather than confrontation. As Elias rebuilt his life brick by brick, from mending engines to mending his soul, the shocking event on that rainy street became a beacon of hope, proving that even in the darkest corners, a single act of courage could ignite change. The words, "Don't talk," evolved into a symbol between them, not of silence, but of understanding that actions spoke louder, that true compassion required no fanfare. Sophie's recovery was slow but steady, her laughter returning like a melody long forgotten, and Elias, no longer invisible, walked the streets with purpose, his eyes now holding not just pain, but possibility. If this story has touched your heart and reminded you of the unbreakable spirit within us all, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your engagement means the world and helps spread these moments of love further. Before we wrap up, I'd love for you to comment below with the line, "Kindness saves lives," if you felt the emotion in Elias's journey.